The disciples had Jesus in the boat with them, and yet they still sailed into a storm. Storms can come in many shapes, sizes, or forms. However, if you can just remember to think that it's only a test of faith, you can make it through the storm. The second thing that you must remember in order to make it through a storm is to always expect the unexpected. Always expect the unexpected. Look at verses 36 and 37. It says, "And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. There they were sailing across the calm sea of Galilee, heading toward the other side." Then in verse 37, we see a sudden change in scenery. The Sea of Galilee to this day is still known for its great and sudden windstorm. And given the fact that they were sailing in the evening, made the storm all the more dangerous. If you can recall in chapter 1, Simon, Andrew, James, and John were experienced fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. Therefore, they were probably assumed that they can handle the storm based on their experience. Some of us today try to handle our storm in the same manner. We think that we can handle it based on our experience, making the same mistakes that the disciples made by underestimating the storm. For instance, in New York City, a 23-year-old man who was set to get married gets gunned down the night before his wedding. His soon-to-be wife wakes up the next morning elated, happy about her big day. It is instead given the bad news that her soon-to-be husband has been shot dead. How does anyone deal with the unsuspected loss of a loved one? You may be sitting there in your seats this morning thinking that that could never happen to me. But there's one thing that we can learn from that story, my brothers and sisters, that is to always expect the unexpected. The third and final thing, because we only have 15 minutes. The third and final thing you must do in order to make it through the storm is remain calm and turn to Jesus. Remain calm and turn to Jesus. Look at verse 38, if you will, where it says, "But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?'" The reaction of the disciples during the storm showed that they had no faith. And for that matter, they had no idea who Jesus really was. They panicked because they thought that Jesus was unconcerned with their current situation. They believed that they were going to drown. They were at a point of despair, believing that Jesus didn't even care. But my brothers and sisters, I stopped by this morning to tell you that God cares. God sent his only begotten son because he cares. Jesus died on the cross for you and me because he cares. We can learn a valuable lesson this morning from the disciples if we just turn to Jesus in our own times of need. Look at the response of Jesus in verse 39. He does not rebuke the disciples for their lack of faith. He rebukes the storm and says to the sea, "Peace, be still." The Greek phrase there literally means to silence or to muzzle. The term muzzle indicates that there was some sort of demonic spirit behind the storm. But with the sound and command of his voice, Jesus silenced the storm, illustrating that he had all power in his hand and in his mouth. Are y'all with me? Likewise, Jesus showed that fear could not overtake him, that he was larger than fear himself. St. Augustine, that great African theologian, once said that when we allow fear to overtake us, we forget that Jesus sleeps within us. When we find ourselves in the midst of a storm, we must remember to turn to Jesus and just remain calm. But oh, my brothers and sisters, the story does not end there. The story does not end with Jesus calming the storm. Can I tell you how the story ends? You see, you have to read on to chapter 5, verse 1, where the record says they made it to the other side. In other words, they made it through the storm. They made it through the rain. About 2 years ago, I went to work one morning, and I felt the right side of my face feeling a little strange. And I looked in the mirror, and I noticed that I couldn't smile anymore. I couldn't close my eye anymore. So when I went to the doctor told me, said, Wesley, you have what is called Bell's palsy. We don't know if you will ever be able to smile again. We don't know if you will ever be able to close your eye again. But I looked at him. Instead of panicking, I told him the same thing I've had to tell people all of my life. I told him I can make it through the storm. I can make it through the rain, because time is filled with swift transition. Not on earth or unmoved can stand. I told him I'm going to build my hopes on things eternal, and I'm just going to hold on to God's unchanging hand. And finally, I remembered what David said. David said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy, I say joy, 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 joy cometh in the morning. Somebody ought to give God a hand clap of praise.